Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a place you've probably seen in history books, maybe on a vase, or if you're a real nerd, in the epic poems of Homer. We're going to step into the sun-drenched, olive-groved world of ancient Greece, not to fight a war or build a temple, but to figure out the most fundamental question of their day. How did they manage not to starve? You're going to follow the path of a simple Greek citizen. And trust me, the diet you're about to explore is a far cry from a modern-day gyros or souvlaki platter. You'll be surprised at how simple yet ingenious their food sources were. In fact, if you tried to survive on this diet, you probably wouldn't last a week. It's a miracle they built a civilization on it, to be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, let me know your location and what time it is for you in the comments. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a dusty path in what feels like forever ago. The air is thick with the scent of sun-baked earth and wild thyme. Before you, spread across the hills, are the three pillars of all life in this ancient world. This isn't just about food, it's about life itself, and it all revolves around what historians call the Mediterranean triad: grains, grapes, and olives. If you wanted to survive, this was your reality. Everything else was a bonus, a luxury, or just a little extra flavor. You're not just looking at a farm, you're looking at the entire economic, social, and cultural backbone of a civilization. First, let's talk about the grains. You see vast fields of golden stalks, but they're not what you're used to. This isn't the fluffy, high-protein wheat that makes modern bread. No, the staple grain for most of the ancient Greek population was barley. It was hardy, could survive in the rocky soil and dry climate, and was generally more reliable than wheat. You watch as a farmer harvests it by hand, the grains threshed and then ground, not into a fine flour, but a coarse meal called alfita. This meal was the base for a lot of their food. Most of the time it was mixed with water to form a simple, unleavened bread, called maza or maza. Think of it as a thick, dense, unappealing kind of pancake or porridge that you would eat with almost every meal. A mainstream historical fact is that because of its superior yield in the Greek climate, barley was the primary food source for the average citizen, while wheat was a more expensive, sought-after grain, often reserved for the wealthy or for festival breads. Next, you turn to the sprawling vineyards. The grapes hang heavy on the vines, not just for eating, but for their most important transformation. The grape was the source of wine, oinos, and wine was more than just an alcoholic beverage. It was a daily necessity. The process of fermenting grapes in large terracotta pots called pithoi was a ritual passed down for generations. You might wonder, were they always just drinking wine? And the answer is a firm no. Drinking undiluted wine, akritos oinos, was considered uncivilized, something only a barbarian would do. Instead, you see a slave pouring wine into a large mixing bowl called a crater, adding water from a nearby well. This practice was so fundamental that the ratio of wine to water was a constant topic of debate at banquets. And here's where historians still argue whether the most common mixture was 3 parts water to 1 part wine, or something more potent. The truth is, it likely depended on the host and the occasion, but the core idea was to enjoy the taste and social aspect of the wine without losing one's self-control, a core tenet of Greek philosophy. Finally, you walk past gnarled trees with silvery green leaves. These are the olive trees. To a modern eye, the olive is a fruit, but to the Greeks, it was so much more. The olives were pressed into what they called liquid gold, olive oil, eleon. It was a food, of course, used to cook, flavor bread, and preserve foods. But it was also fuel for lamps, a lubricant for athletes, a perfume base, and even a primitive form of soap. A quirky tidbit is that athletes would cover their bodies in olive oil before a competition, not just to protect their skin from the sun, but to make themselves too slippery for their wrestling opponents to grab. After the games, they would use a curved bronze tool called a strigil to scrape the oil, dirt, and sweat off their skin. It was their version of a shower. So you see, you are completely surrounded by the three key ingredients for survival: grains for sustenance, grapes for a drink that was both a social lubricant and a purifying agent, and olives for fat, flavor, and daily use. These three simple crops were the entire foundation of their world, and without them, the magnificent Parthenon, the plays of Sophocles, and the philosophy of Socrates would never have existed. You can almost feel the simplicity of it all in the warm air around you. The cool morning air gives way to the first warmth of the sun, and your stomach, which probably hasn't had anything but the most basic of sustenance for months, gives a polite little rumble. You watch as the farmer from the last section returns to his small, simple stone hut. This is the time for the day's first meal, but don't get your hopes up. You're not about to sit down to a platter of scrambled eggs, sausage, and hash browns. That's a luxury of a different world, a different time, one where refrigeration and a global supply chain exist. No, what you are about to witness is pure, unadulterated necessity. This meal is not about pleasure. It's about akritisma, the not-to-starve breakfast. It's the bare minimum required to get out there and face the day. You watch the farmer's wife come out with a basket. She pulls out a hard, dry piece of bread, a leftover from the day before, and hands it to him. This is not the fresh, soft bread you might imagine. This is stale barley bread, which has gone as hard as a rock in the dry Greek air. To a modern person, this would be completely inedible. But for the ancient Greeks, this was the central component of their breakfast. It's a mainstream historical fact that for the vast majority of the population, breakfast was not a formal meal at all, but simply a quick bite to hold off hunger until later in the day. The akritisma was a functional snack, not a social gathering. It was the fuel you needed to get to your olive groves or your workshop. But how do you eat a piece of bread that's as hard as a stone? You watch as the farmer takes the bread and dips it into a simple earthenware bowl. The bowl contains wine, but again, not the fine, aged wine of a nobleman's banquet. This is likely the same diluted wine they drank the night before, or perhaps a very low-quality, basic vintage. He dips the hard bread into the liquid, letting it soak just long enough to soften it. This simple act of dipping the bread in wine was the most common way to make the barley bread palatable. It was a resourceful solution to a daily problem, turning a nearly inedible leftover into a functional food source. You can almost hear the soft scraping sound of the bread against the bowl as he soaks it. It's a quiet, repetitive act, a humble ritual that has been repeated for centuries. But what if you were feeling a little more adventurous? Or perhaps you were a soldier, a philosopher, or just someone tired of the same old bread and wine. You learn about kaikion, a more complex drink that could sometimes accompany the breakfast. It was a mixture of barley meal, water, and often herbs like mint or pennyroyal. It was a rustic, almost medicinal-smelling drink that offered a bit more sustenance and flavor. And here's a quirky tidbit. Kykeon was also deeply connected to the Eleusinian Mysteries, a secret religious cult dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. According to myth, when Demeter was in mourning, she refused wine and would only accept a drink of kykeon. This made the simple barley-based drink sacred in certain religious contexts, elevating it from a simple peasant food to a ritualistic concoction. As you stand there, observing this simple morning meal, you can't help but wonder about the precise recipes. Was the kykeon just barley, or were other herbs and spices common? And what was the exact proportion of wine to bread? This brings us to a point where historians still argue whether the akritisma was a universal breakfast for all Greeks, or if the wealthy had more substantial morning meals. While we know the basic formula, the finer details of this simple meal are lost to time, leaving us to piece together the picture from fragments of pottery and the occasional mention in ancient texts. So, you see, breakfast was a no-nonsense affair. It was practical, it was simple, and it was rooted in the most basic ingredients available: the barley from the fields and the fermented grapes from the vineyard. It was the first step in a day that would be filled with physical labor under the hot sun, a day where every calorie counted. With his breakfast finished, the farmer gets up, his energy replenished just enough, and heads out to his fields, ready to work until the next, slightly more substantial, meal of the day. The sun climbs higher, and the morning air, which was cool just moments ago, begins to feel warm on your skin. The akritisma was simple, but it filled that first gap. You now follow a different path, to a home that suggests a little more comfort, a little more variety. Maybe the family has a bit more land, or they're not as rushed for a long day of back-breaking labor. Because you see, the ancient Greek breakfast wasn't always a grim, dry piece of bread and a cup of watered-down wine. There was a whole other level, a comfort food that, while still simple by our standards, offered a small touch of indulgence. Let's begin with the porridge. Remember that coarse barley meal, the alfita? While it could be used for hard bread, it also formed the base for a hearty porridge. You watch as a cook in a small, smoky kitchen stirs a pot over a low fire. She's mixing the barley meal with water, slowly, until it thickens into a gruel. Sometimes this was all it was, a simple, warm bowl of cooked grain. But on better days, she would add herbs, or even a splash of olive oil for richness. A great example of this is the kykeon we talked about earlier. While it could be a simple drink, it was often thick and viscous, a bit like a soup, especially for those who needed a more substantial meal. The addition of pennyroyal mint, as you see in this kitchen, was not just for flavor. It was believed to have digestive and medicinal properties, making it a very practical and thoughtful addition to their diet. But the real treat, the closest thing to a modern-day breakfast indulgence, was the pancake. You watch as the cook takes a simple mixture of wheat flour, water, and olive oil, and pours it onto a hot, oiled pan. These ancient Greek pancakes were called teganites. Unlike our fluffy light pancakes, these were thin, dense, and crispy on the edges. They were a delightful contrast to the hard, stale barley bread of the common breakfast. And what made them truly special was the topping. Since sugar was an unknown luxury, every bit of sweetness came from nature. The cook drizzles a generous amount of honey over the hot pancakes as they come off the pan. The honey melts into the surface, creating a sweet glaze. It's a mainstream historical fact that honey was the primary sweetener for the Greeks and was a highly valued commodity. Not only was it used in food, but also in medicine and as an offering to the gods. And with those pancakes, you see the cook bring out a small clay bowl filled with something white and crumbly. This is cheese, a crucial part of the Greek diet. It was always fresh, made from either sheep or goat's milk, and had a soft texture and a salty taste. The process was simple. The milk was curdled with a rennet from a calf's stomach, drained, and salted. There were no hard, aged cheeses like Parmesan. They were too difficult to store without modern technology. The cheese you are seeing now is what we might call mizithra, or a very early form of feta. It's crumbled over the pancakes with honey and perhaps some sesame seeds, creating a beautiful and delicious combination of sweet and savory. You can almost feel the texture of the soft cheese contrasting with the crispy pancake in your mouth. Now, a quirky tidbit about this vital sweetener. Ancient Greek beekeepers were incredibly resourceful. They didn't use modern wooden hives. Instead, they built hives out of clay pots, wicker baskets, or even hollowed-out logs, which they would stack or embed into walls to keep them safe. They even knew how to use smoke to calm the bees, much like beekeepers today, a practice that has been passed down for millennia. This expertise in beekeeping was so valued that some prominent philosophers, including Aristotle, wrote extensively about the habits of bees. As you consider these more varied breakfast options, a question hangs in the air. Were these delicacies available to everyone, or were they only for the privileged? This is a point where historians still argue whether the ability to afford a more pleasant breakfast, like pancakes with honey and cheese, was a clear sign of wealth and higher social status. Did the poor only have barley bread, while the slightly more prosperous had access to these richer foods? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, with a more elaborate breakfast reserved for special occasions, or the small group of artisans and merchants who had more disposable income than the average farmer. You see, even in their simplest meals, the ancient Greeks found ways to use the bounty of their land to create not just sustenance, but moments of small pleasure. This meal shows a society that, while frugal, was resourceful and deeply connected to its food sources. It's a little bit of comfort and a little bit of luxury, and it gives you a sense of just how important every bit of food was. The sun is now high overhead, casting short shadows as you feel the midday heat intensify. That little akritisma from earlier? Well, it's probably worn off by now, and your stomach is starting to remind you that while not to starve is a good start, true sustenance requires a bit more effort. For the ancient Greeks, the day's meals weren't evenly distributed. After that meager breakfast, there might be a quick lunch or ariston, but it was barely more substantial. Think of it as another practical, quick bite, perhaps eaten standing up or on the go, often at midday. It might be another piece of bread, a handful of olives, maybe some dried figs, or a small bit of cheese. For the farmer, it was eaten in the fields. For the craftsman, at his workshop. It was functional, never a leisurely affair. But as the afternoon wears on and the shadows lengthen, a different energy begins to build. This is the time for the deepnon, the main meal of the day. This was the most important event, not just for replenishing your energy, but for social connection. Imagine the subtle clinking of pottery and the murmur of conversation as families gather after a long day of labor or learning. This wasn't a formal banquet for most, but the true core of their daily sustenance and interaction. It was the meal where you could finally sit down, relax, and truly satisfy your hunger. The star of the deipnon was still barley bread, maza. It was the canvas for everything else. But what truly brought the maza to life was the opson. This isn't a specific dish, it's a concept. Opsin literally means relish, or something eaten with bread. It was anything that made the plain bread more palatable, more flavorful. For the average person, opsin primarily meant vegetables and legumes. You would see bowls filled with cooked lentils, chickpeas, and beans, providing vital protein and fiber. Cabbage, onions, garlic, and wild greens like mallow or nettles were also common, often boiled or stewed. These were the workhorses of the Greek diet, providing essential nutrients that sustained them. If you lived near the coast, fish would have been a prized option. You see, fresh fish was a delicacy, caught daily, and often eaten immediately. It was a primary source of animal protein for many. However, if you were inland, fresh fish was rare. Instead, you'd find salted or dried fish, preserved to last the journey. This preserved fish, often quite pungent, was a lifesaver for those away from the sea. And speaking of pungent, let's talk about a truly quirky tidbit: the use of gyros, or fish sauce. While it's more famously Roman, the Greeks had their own versions. This was a fermented condiment made from fish guts, salt, and herbs left to ferment in the sun. It would have had an incredibly strong, salty, umami flavor and was used to season everything, much like salt or pepper for us. You can almost smell its potent aroma wafting from a distant kitchen. Of course, olives and olive oil were ever present at the Deepnon. Olives were eaten whole, cured in brine, or crushed for their oil, which was used generously in cooking and as a dressing for almost every dish. You'd also see cheese, the fresh, salty kind made from goat or sheep's milk, crumbled over vegetables or added to stews. And to wash it all down, there was always wine, still diluted with water, creating a communal experience that encouraged conversation and relaxation after a long day. This combination of grains, legumes, vegetables, and the occasional fish or cheese formed the bulk of their sustenance. As you observe these evening meals, a question arises that has long puzzled scholars. Historians still argue whether meat was a regular part of the average Greek diet, or if its consumption was almost exclusively tied to religious sacrifices and special festivals. While we know that meat was eaten, especially during public feasts, where sacrificial animals were distributed, daily meat consumption for the common citizen was likely very rare. It was an expensive commodity, and raising animals for meat was less efficient than growing crops in the challenging Greek terrain. So for most people, meat was a rare treat, a luxury enjoyed perhaps a few times a year, not a daily staple. The Deepnon was more than just eating. It was the heart of the home, a time for family to reconnect, share news, and prepare for the quiet hours of the night. It was a testament to their resourcefulness, turning humble ingredients into a complete, sustaining meal, allowing them to not just survive, but to thrive, and eventually build one of the most influential civilizations in history. You feel the satisfaction of a full stomach as the light outside dims and the sounds of the household settle. The last of the Deipnon's crumbs are cleared away, and you feel the satisfaction of a full stomach. But as you reflect on the meal, you realize something. While the bread, the maza, was the foundation, it was just bread. The real magic, the flavor, the variety, and the nourishment came from what you put with it. It was the opson, the relish. For the ancient Greeks, the word wasn't just a side dish. It was a fundamental concept, a counterpoint to the staple grain. You can almost hear the soft, scraping sound as a cook in the next room prepares more of it, the main event of any truly satisfying meal. So, let's step into the world of opson. For most people, This meant the bounty of the earth and the sea. You see a vibrant array of colors and textures in a clay bowl. There are legumes, like lentils and chickpeas, cooked down into a rich, earthy stew. A great example of a mainstream historical fact is that these legumes were a primary source of protein for the vast majority of the population, more so than meat. They were cheap, easy to grow in the challenging Greek climate, and incredibly nutritious. A simple lentil stew, flavored with onions and wild herbs, was a staple that sustained entire communities. Next to the lentils, you see a basket of fresh vegetables and wild greens. There are onions and garlic, of course, but also leeks, cabbages, and the leafy greens of plants you can't even name. These were often boiled until tender and dressed simply with olive oil and a dash of vinegar. They were the essential source of vitamins and minerals. The Greeks were also masters of foraging, and you see a young boy returning with a small bundle of wild asparagus and mallow, which were foraged from the fields and hillsides, adding a burst of freshness and flavor that you wouldn't find in a cultivated garden. Now, let's talk about the ocean's contribution. For those living near the coast, opson often meant fish. You can almost feel the briny sea breeze as you imagine a fisherman bringing his morning's catch to the marketplace. Small fish would be grilled whole, bones and all, and eaten simply. Larger fish were more expensive and often reserved for special occasions. However, for those living inland, fish was a different matter entirely. Here, you would find fish that was salted, dried, or pickled to make the journey from the coast. These preserved fish were an important source of protein and flavor, even if they lacked the freshness of a seaside meal. This brings us back to a truly unique and, let's be honest, slightly bizarre culinary staple: gyros, the Greek version of fermented fish sauce. This isn't a quick, convenient seasoning. It's a process. You can almost see it in your mind's eye. Clay vats sitting out in the hot Mediterranean sun for months, filled with a mixture of fish entrails, heads, and small whole fish, all mixed with salt and herbs. The sun and the salt would break down the mixture, creating a rich, potent, and salty liquid that was then strained. The resulting sauce was incredibly flavorful and was used to season everything. It was a trade commodity, and a little went a long way. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Gyros was so valued that some of the best varieties, known as haematia, were made from the blood and intestines of tuna and mackerel. The pungent aroma, though probably overpowering to a modern nose, was a sign of a well-stocked kitchen and a flavorful meal. As you consider all these options, a thought occurs to you. Were all these forms of opson equally available to everyone? Or did your opson tell the world about your social standing? This is a point where historians still argue whether the type and variety of opson a person consumed was a more accurate indicator of wealth than their access to meat. Was a person who ate a wide variety of fresh fish and vegetables considered more prosperous than someone who relied solely on lentils and salted fish? While meat was the ultimate luxury, the day-to-day diet was defined by the opson, and the quality of your opson could speak volumes about your place in society. So you see, the bread was just the vessel. The true art and soul of the meal lay in the opson, the relishes, the legumes, the vegetables, and the fish that transformed a basic carb into a nourishing, flavorful, and complete meal. It's a beautiful system, a simple but effective one, that allowed a civilization to grow and flourish on the very basics of the earth. As you reflect on the opson, that feeling of sufficiency returns, a sense of having eaten a simple but complete meal. but in the back of your mind, a craving lingers. A deep, primal craving that a bowl of lentil stew just can't satisfy. What about meat? Where did the ancient Greeks get their animal protein? You might think of a steak or a roast, but to them, that was a world away. For most, meat was an incredibly rare commodity, a luxury tied more to religion and social status than to daily sustenance. The journey from field to plate was very different when it came to animal products. You see, the first thing to understand is a mainstream historical fact. The geography of Greece was simply not ideal for large-scale animal husbandry. The rocky, mountainous terrain was much better suited to growing grains, olives, and grapes. Raising cattle or pigs required vast amounts of land and fodder that was simply not available to most people. Therefore, from a purely economic and agricultural standpoint, a vegetarian diet, supplemented by fish, was the most efficient and practical way to feed the population. For the people who lived near the sea, however, the answer to the protein question was obvious. The sea was their larder. You can almost smell the salt as you watch a fisherman on a small boat hauling in a net filled with small, silver fish. Fish was the most common form of animal protein. You'd see a variety of them: small, oily fish like anchovies and sardines, and larger, more prized catches like tuna and mackerel. These were often prepared simply, either grilled over an open flame or cured with salt to preserve them. The sight of a grilled fish, with its crispy skin and tender meat, was a common one in a coastal town, a delicious and accessible source of nutrition. But inland, where the sea was a distant memory, meat took on a different, almost sacred significance. This is where we get to the core of meat consumption in ancient Greece. For the average person, the main, and often only, way to eat meat was through religious sacrifice. You find yourself standing in front of a temple, the air thick with the smell of smoke and roasting fat. A sheep or a goat is being ritually slaughtered as an offering to a god. After the sacrifice, the animal is cut up. A portion of the animal, the bones and fat, and sometimes a symbolic part of the entrails, is burned as an offering to the gods. The rest of the meat is then cooked and distributed to the community. This system was a brilliant social and economic innovation. It transformed a scarce resource into a communal feast, tying the act of eating meat directly to the gods and the fabric of society. Eating meat was not a private act. It was a public one. It was a communal gathering, a time for celebration and shared prosperity, even for the poorest citizen. And here's a quirky tidbit. The Greeks believed that the aroma of the burning fat was a delight to the gods, a gift more valuable than the meat itself. So while the gods got a savory smoke offering, the humans got to feast. It was a fair trade, wouldn't you say? And while we're on the subject, this practice of communal meat distribution is the subject of a long-standing academic debate. Historians still argue whether the system of religious sacrifice was a genuine expression of piety or a clever social and economic system designed to ensure the equitable distribution of a highly prized but scarce resource. Was it a deeply held spiritual belief, or was it an ingenious way to feed a population and maintain social harmony? It's a fascinating question, and the answer is likely a bit of both. So, you see, the sight of a roasted joint of meat was not a casual one. It meant a holiday, a festival, or a special occasion. It was a symbol of communal celebration and the bounty of the gods, not the convenience of a daily dinner. For the most part, the ancient Greek diet was a humble one, rooted in the earth and the sea, with meat serving as a rare ceremonial treat. You feel that distinction deep in your bones as you leave the scene of the feast, with the lingering scent of smoke and roasted meat in the air. As the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, you realize something profound. All those tantalizing tastes of fish, the rare scent of roasted meat, the sweet drizzle of honey on a pancake, they were fleeting moments, small luxuries in a world built on something far more fundamental. What truly anchored the ancient Greek diet, the very backbone of their existence, was grain. This wasn't just food, it was security, a testament to their resilience against starvation. It was the constant, unwavering presence on every table, every day, from the humblest hovel to the grandest Athenian villa. You stand now amidst fields that seem endless, stretching towards the horizon, shimmering with ripe stalks. You've already learned that barley, Crete, was king here. It wasn't because they preferred its taste, often described as coarse or earthy, but because it was incredibly hardy. It could thrive in the often dry, rocky, and unforgiving soil of Greece, yielding a reliable harvest year after year, even when wheat would falter. Wheat, pyros, on the other hand, was the aristocrat of grains. It produced a finer, lighter flour, perfect for more delicate breads, but it was more demanding to grow, and therefore more expensive, often reserved for the wealthy or for special occasions. It's a mainstream historical fact that while wheat held a higher status, barley formed the overwhelming bulk of the daily caloric intake for the vast majority of the Greek population. The journey from stock to sustenance was a laborious one. You hear a rhythmic, grating sound emanating from almost every home you pass. This is the sound of grinding stones. You peer into a modest dwelling and see a woman, her muscles tensing with each movement as she works a small, saddle-shaped quern. She places handfuls of dried barley between two rough stones, slowly grinding it into a coarse meal called alfida. This was a daily, physically demanding chore, often performed by women or slaves. The repetitive motion, the dust in the air, the sheer effort required to produce enough alfida for a single day's bread gives you a profound appreciation for their resilience. It's a quirky tidbit to realize that this monotonous task was a constant, almost meditative rhythm of ancient Greek life, a stark contrast to our instant gratification world of pre-packaged flour. Once the alfida was ready, it was transformed into the ultimate staple, maza. This was the unyeasted barley flatbread, often thick and dense, sometimes described as a simple gruel or porridge when mixed with more liquid. It was the bread of necessity, easily made and filling. It formed the literal base of almost every meal, serving as a plain canvas for the more flavorful opson. For the more prosperous or on special occasions, wheat flour would be used to make artos, a finer, sometimes leavened bread that would be baked in communal ovens or by professional bakers, artokopoi, who began to appear in larger cities. And artos and maza weren't just food. They often served as essential utensils. You see a family at their deipnon using pieces of bread to scoop up their lentil stew, or as absorbent plates beneath their fish or vegetables, soaking up all the delicious juices. When the main dish was finished, the gravy-soaked bread was eaten, ensuring not a single drop of flavor or nutrient was wasted. This clever dual purpose highlights their practicality and frugality, making every crumb count. As you consider the omnipresence of grain, a thought arises among scholars. Historians still argue whether the shift from a diet almost exclusively dependent on home-ground maza to the increasing availability and consumption of commercially baked artos in urban centers marked a significant economic and social transformation in ancient Greek society. Did it signify a growing specialization of labor, a nascent food industry, and a subtle widening of the gap between the rural poor and the urban rich? It's a question that delves into the very structure of their evolving economy and daily life. The rhythmic grinding sound fades as night truly falls, leaving you with a profound understanding of the grain's role. It was the anchor, the sustainer, the quiet hero of the ancient Greek diet. Without it, the grandeur of their civilization would have crumbled long before any invading army set foot on their shores. You feel a deep respect for the simple, enduring power of the grain. The sun has finally set, and a cool evening breeze rustles the olive trees. As you sit down to the night's deep nun, you are offered a cup. It's not water, though that is available in a separate jug. This is wine, and for the ancient Greeks, it was not just a drink for celebrations. It was a daily necessity, as fundamental to their diet as grain. It was, in many ways, the safer, more flavorful alternative to the unpredictable and often questionable quality of plain water. This wasn't about getting drunk. It was about hydration, and surprisingly, about health. You learn that a mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greeks, while aware of clean springs and wells, often relied on sources that could be contaminated. The fermentation process of wine killed off many of the harmful pathogens found in the water, making it a reliable and safer option for daily consumption. It was a simple yet brilliant solution to a public health problem that they may not have fully understood scientifically, but definitely understood practically. So, you see, a little wine in your cup wasn't a choice for a good time. It was a choice for a good, healthy life. But you notice something crucial. The wine you're about to drink is not the strong, full-bodied stuff you might get from a bottle today. You see a large, two-handled terracotta bowl in the center of the table, a crater, and into this bowl, a host pours wine from a jug. Then from another jug, a significant amount of water is added. This act of mixing was a ritual, a profound cultural norm. Drinking undiluted wine, akratos oinos, was considered a barbaric act, something done by uncivilized Scythians or Thracians. It showed a lack of self-control and refinement. To a Greek, a man who drank pure wine was a man out of control, a slave to his passions. The ratio of wine to water varied, but a typical mix was 3 parts water to 1 part wine, creating a pleasant, light beverage that was easy to drink with a meal. You can almost feel the light, fruity taste on your tongue, not harsh or overpowering, but subtle and refreshing. This was a drink that could be enjoyed by everyone at the table, from men to women, and even on certain occasions, by children. This was the social lubricant of the ancient world, a drink to facilitate conversation, poetry, and philosophy, not to obliterate the senses. A truly quirky tidbit is the variety of flavors they achieved by adding things to their wine. Since they didn't have modern filtration methods, a good way to preserve wine and add flavor was to introduce resin from pine trees. This gave the wine a slightly pungent, woody taste, a practice that continues today in some forms of retsina. They also spiced their wine with honey, seawater, cinnamon, thyme, and myrtle. It's a testament to their creativity and their ability to turn a simple necessity into a small art form. Before taking a sip, you also watch the host pour a small portion onto the ground as a libation, an offering to the gods, a silent thank you for the day's bounty. It's a quiet, humbling moment of gratitude. As you consider the social significance of this ritual, a long-standing academic debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether the strict rules around diluting wine were primarily a matter of cultural and hygienic necessity, or if they also served as a subtle social class marker. While everyone mixed their wine, the quality of the wine itself could vary wildly. Did having access to sweeter, more aromatic wines, even when diluted, mark a person as belonging to a higher social stratum? And did the ratios change depending on the company, with more potent drinks being reserved for less formal or more exclusive gatherings? The simple act of mixing wine was, in many ways, a complex social code. You take a sip, feeling the lightness of the drink, and you understand its purpose. It's not just to quench thirst, but to soothe, to purify, and to connect. It was a central part of their daily life, turning the simple act of drinking into a shared, civilized experience. You feel the buzz, but it's a soft, gentle one, just enough to relax and enjoy the moment. As you leave the gentle buzz of the communal drinking and step into the quieter, more fragrant spaces of ancient Greece, you get a real sense of what truly made their diet not just survivable, but delicious. We've talked about the big three, the grains, the grapes, and the olives, but the real flavor, the vitamins, and the subtle complexities came from the countless other things they pulled from the earth. You can almost feel the softness of a garden bed under your feet, the air fragrant with herbs, and the promise of fresh, honest food. You find yourself in a small, well-tended garden or quipos attached to a modest house. This wasn't just a patch of soil. It was a living larder, a year-round source of sustenance. The Greeks were masters of making the most of a small space. You see rows of cabbage in leeks, the green tops of broad beans poking from the earth, and the low-lying leaves of what look like onions and garlic. These simple vegetables were a constant, a reliable source of nutrition that could be cooked in stews, added to porridges, or simply boiled and dressed with a little olive oil. It was a humble but essential part of their diet. But the real treat, the seasonal highlight, was the fruit. You see a fig tree, its branches heavy with ripe, plump figs. The ancient Greeks adored figs. You pull one from a branch and its skin feels soft and warm from the sun. The interior is sweet and seedy, a natural sun-ripened candy. Figs were so important that they were a staple, eaten fresh in season and dried to last through the long winter months, providing a vital source of energy and sweetness when other fruits were unavailable. They were a core part of their diet, a true symbol of nature's generosity. You also see the familiar swollen bunches of grapes, some reserved for wine, but many eaten fresh, their sweet juice a perfect antidote to the hot, dry climate. Other fruits were grown too, though not in the same abundance. Pomegranates with their jeweled seeds, and sour quinces and apples, which were often cooked with honey to make them palatable. Beyond the cultivated garden, the Greeks were also master foragers. A quirky tidbit is the role of snails in their diet. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but to a Greek, snails were a common and easily acquired food source. They would collect them after a rain shower and cook them in a variety of ways, often by boiling them in a mixture of water and herbs. They were a cheap, accessible form of protein that could be found in almost any rocky landscape, a testament to their resourcefulness and their ability to see food where others would see only pests. You also see someone gathering wild herbs, thyme, oregano, and marjoram, and wild greens like nettles and chicory, all of which added flavor and a much-needed boost of vitamins to an otherwise simple diet. And it wasn't just about foraging for wild plants. Their reliance on pulses and legumes, chickpeas, lentils, and broad beans was a key part of their diet, a foundational fact that cannot be overstated. These were the primary source of protein for the majority of the population, more so than any animal products. A hearty lentil soup, flavored with garlic and onions and enriched with olive oil, was a dish that could be found on every table. It was simple, filling, and incredibly nutritious. As you consider this rich tapestry of foraged and cultivated foods, a scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether the reliance on wild foraged foods was a sign of poverty and necessity, or if it was a celebrated skill, a deep connection to the land that every Greek was expected to have. Was the ability to identify and prepare wild herbs and greens a sign of a humble background? Or was it a form of sophisticated traditional knowledge that was passed down through the generations? Was foraging a last resort for the poor, or was it a practice that connected all Greeks, regardless of status, to the land that sustained them? The setting sun casts long, quiet shadows over the fields, and you feel the immense depth of this ancient food culture. It was a system built not on abundance, but on ingenuity, a deep understanding of the land, and a resourceful spirit. The fruits and vegetables were not just a side dish. They were a lifeline, a source of flavor and health that allowed a civilization to flourish on a seemingly simple diet. The last bite of that savory opson is now just a memory, and you realize something. Your palate, so used to a constant stream of sugar in every modern food and drink, is craving something sweet. But in this ancient world, a trip to the corner store for a candy bar is impossible. There is no sugar cane here, no refined white crystals to be found. The sweetness that the ancient Greeks knew came from a very different source, a golden, liquid form of nature's magic. We're talking about honey, a substance so valued it was often called liquid gold, and its story is as rich and complex as its taste. You watch as a beekeeper tends to his hives, not the white geometric boxes you're used to, but simple, cylindrical clay pots stacked in a quiet, sun-drenched corner. This is a scene that has played out for thousands of years. The Greeks were skilled beekeepers, and their knowledge was passed down through the generations. They knew how to handle the bees with care, using smoke from burning herbs to calm them before extracting the sweet nectar. This isn't a small side hustle. This is a serious and revered profession. A mainstream historical fact is that honey was the only concentrated sweetener available to the ancient Greeks, and it was used in almost every aspect of their lives, from food to medicine to religious offerings. You see the beekeeper carefully scrape a honeycomb, the golden liquid dripping into a waiting bowl. The uses of this precious honey were endless. In the kitchen, it was used to sweeten simple porridges and cakes. A popular treat was a type of cheesecake called plakis, made from fresh cheese, honey, and flour, and often topped with bay leaves. It's an ancient recipe that reminds you just how resourceful they were. But honey wasn't just for sweetening desserts. It was used to preserve fruits and nuts, and even to add a touch of sweetness and flavor to their wine. Beyond the kitchen, honey had another equally important role: medicine. The Greeks, including the father of medicine himself, Hippocrates, understood the antibacterial properties of honey. You watch as a mother applies a poultice of honey to a small cut on her son's knee. It was used to treat wounds, soothe sore throats, and as a general tonic for health. It was considered a pure substance, a gift from the gods, and was often mixed with milk to create a nutritious drink called melikraton, which was a general panacea for all kinds of ailments. Its value was so great that it was often used in religious rituals, poured out as a libation to the gods, a pure and worthy offering. And this brings us to a truly quirky tidbit about their reverence for honey. In ancient Greek mythology, ambrosia, the food of the gods, was often described as being made from honey. And some philosophers, including Plato, believed that a diet rich in honey could purify the mind and lead to a more virtuous life. The humble bee and its sweet product were seen as a symbol of divine bounty and natural purity. The thought of it makes you feel like you are standing in a place of immense history and quiet wisdom. The rhythmic buzzing of the bees and the warm scent of the honey in the air is truly calming. As you consider the omnipresence of honey, a question arises in the minds of scholars. Historians still argue whether honey was a universally accessible sweetener for all classes or if it was a luxury item due to the difficulty of beekeeping and its demand in so many applications. Was a simple farmer able to afford honey for his family, or was it a treat reserved for the wealthy? Was it a substance for daily use, or something reserved for special occasions and medicinal purposes? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, but its value was undoubtedly immense, and it played a crucial role in their diet and culture, a role that our modern, sugar-saturated world can barely comprehend. The golden light of the moon begins to rise, and you feel the immense depth of the ancient Greek diet. It was a world where a simple bowl of porridge or a piece of bread was transformed into something special, something to look forward to, by a simple drizzle of liquid gold. It was a testament to the fact that when you have less, you appreciate what you have so much more. You feel a new sense of gratitude for the simple sweetness that life can offer. The quiet hum of the night is settling in, but in a world without electric lights, the day's entertainment is not over. The dipnon was for the family, but for the male elite of society, the evening was just beginning. You find yourself standing at the threshold of a different kind of room, one filled with laughter, the soft music of a lyre, and the gentle clinking of pottery. This is the andron, the men's quarters of a Greek house, and you are about to witness a symposium. Don't be fooled by the name. While it sounds like a scholarly conference, the word itself literally means drinking together, and it was a ritual of profound social, political, and philosophical importance. You enter and see men reclining on low couches called klinai, arranged around the perimeter of the room. This wasn't a formal sit-down meal at a table, but a relaxed, semi-recumbent posture that signaled leisure and comfort. In front of each man is a small table laden with the remnants of a more elaborate meal, a precursor to the main event. While their daily meals were humble, the food at a symposium could be more varied, with dishes of roasted poultry, wild game, or even sweeter cakes and honeyed fruits. The food, however, was a backdrop. It was simply the prelude to the main event. The real star of the show is not on a plate, but in a large crater at the center of the room. This is the communal mixing bowl, where the ritual of diluting wine is about to begin. The host, or a designated symposiarch, the master of the party, would set the ratio of wine to water. This was a mainstream historical fact. The symposiarch held the power to control the mood and pace of the event, ensuring that the participants achieved a pleasant state of sociability and not a state of unseemly drunkenness. The ritual of mixing was so ingrained that it was almost a form of art, with the symposiarch carefully balancing the potency of the wine to allow for clear-headed conversation. And what conversations they were! This wasn't just a simple party. It was a forum for intellectual and social bonding. You listen as one man recites a poem he has composed, his voice a soft, rhythmic cadence in the quiet room. Another takes up the lyre and sings a melody that seems to echo through the ages. You hear the deep, resonant tones of a philosophical debate, perhaps one about the nature of love, as captured in Plato's famous dialogue, The Symposium. This was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the wine, but it wasn't all high-minded philosophy. A truly quirky tidbit is a popular game they played called Kotabos. After finishing your cup of wine, you would hold the drinking vessel, a wide, shallow bowl called a kylix, by its handle and swing your arm to flick the last dregs of wine at a target, usually a small statue or disc balanced on a lampstand. The goal was to hit the target, making a satisfying clang, without splashing yourself or your companions. It required a surprising amount of skill and a steady hand, and it was a popular way to pass the time and show off your grace under the influence. It's a wonderful image, a testament to the fact that even in their most intellectual moments, the Greeks loved a good game. As you observe this intricate social gathering, a long-standing academic debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether these events were truly the elevated, high-minded affairs of philosophy and intellectual discourse that we read about in texts like Plato's, or if they were often just rowdy, drunken parties that devolved into chaos. Was the philosophical discourse just a thin veneer for an excuse to get drunk with your friends? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, with a wide spectrum of gatherings ranging from deeply intellectual conversations to raucous, out-of-control binges, all of which were still framed within the rules and rituals of the symposium. The night wears on, the lamps glow softly, and you feel the weight of history in the air. This was the place where ideas were born, where politics were discussed, and where friendships were forged, all over a simple bowl of diluted wine. The symposium was a mirror of their society, a beautiful blend of art, intellect, ritual, and a little bit of raucous fun. You feel the deep sense of camaraderie and belonging that comes from sharing a cup with others. The hum of the symposium fades away, replaced by the quiet intellectual murmur of a different kind of gathering. The Greeks were not just great builders and warriors, they were great thinkers. And as they observed the world, they began to understand that the things they put into their bodies had a direct effect on their health and their minds. We're now going to step into the quiet, sun-drenched sanctuary of a man who is often called the father of medicine, Hippocrates. To Hippocrates and his followers, food was not just sustenance, it was medicine. They saw a profound connection between diet, the body, and a balanced life. This entire medical philosophy was rooted in a foundational belief, a mainstream historical fact known as the humoral theory. You see, the Greeks believed that the human body was a microcosm, a tiny reflection of the universe, and was composed of 4 fundamental substances, or humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. They believed that good health was a state of balance between these 4 humors. If one became too dominant, a person would become sick. For example, an excess of yellow bile could lead to a fiery, aggressive temper, while too much black bile could cause melancholy. And how did they keep these humors in balance? Through diet. You watch as a physician, a student of Hippocrates, carefully examines a patient. He's not just looking for symptoms, he's asking about their diet. He might prescribe a certain food to correct an imbalance. For example, if a patient had a fever, he might prescribe cold foods like lettuce or cucumbers to cool the body and reduce the amount of yellow bile. Conversely, for someone with a sluggish temperament, he might prescribe hot foods like garlic and onions to stir up their passion and energy. This belief that food could act as a direct therapeutic agent was revolutionary, and it underpins the famous quote often attributed to Hippocrates, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." The Greeks believed that every food had its own qualities. They didn't just see a lentil, they saw a dry food that could calm the body. They didn't just see a piece of meat, they saw a hot food that could increase a person's vitality. This was a system of thinking that applied to everything. A quirky tidbit is their belief that certain foods like garlic and onions had such powerful hot properties that they could affect your temperament, making you more passionate or even aggressive. The Spartans, a warrior culture, often consumed large amounts of these foods, believing it contributed to their fierce nature. Conversely, lettuce was seen as a cold food that would make a person sleepy, and was often served at the end of a long dinner to aid in digestion and calm the mind. This focus on balance and moderation wasn't limited to medicine. It was a core tenet of their entire philosophical worldview. The Delphic maxim, "Nothing in excess," wasn't just a clever saying, it was a way of life. They believed that a person who lived a balanced life, with a balanced diet, would be more rational, more virtuous, and more in tune with the harmony of the universe. The body and the mind were intrinsically linked, and a healthy mind could only exist in a healthy body. It's a beautiful, holistic concept that resonates even today. As you stand in the hushed, intellectual atmosphere of the healing quarters, a scholarly debate arises. Historians still argue whether the strict dietary regimens prescribed by Hippocratic physicians were widely followed by the general population, or if they were largely a practice for the wealthy elite who could afford to seek out such specialized care. Did the common farmer, who had to eat whatever was available to survive, have the luxury of worrying about the balance of their humors? Or was the philosophical ideal of a balanced diet something that only the privileged few could truly put into practice? It's a question that highlights the social divide in ancient Greece, even when it came to something as fundamental as health. The gentle, murmuring voices of the physicians and their students fade into the background. You feel a profound sense of peace, realizing that for the Greeks, a good meal was not just about pleasing the senses, but about nurturing the very essence of your being. It was about balance, harmony, and a deep respect for the subtle power of nature. As the night air grows cool, you find yourself reflecting on the incredible variety you've witnessed in this ancient world. We've explored the bread, the wine, the honey. But now you understand that what you ate wasn't just about what was available. It was a direct reflection of who you were. Your social status, your profession, and your city state all dictated the contents of your plate. You are about to compare the diets of three very different people, and you will see how starkly their food reflected their lives. First, you stand in the simple, humble kitchen of a farmer. His diet is a testament to survival. His plate, or more likely a piece of thick barley bread, is filled with what we've seen before: a bowl of hearty lentil stew, a handful of brined olives, and maybe a few sun-dried figs. His sustenance comes almost entirely from his own land. His life is one of hard physical labor, and his diet is perfectly suited to it. High in fiber, with protein from legumes and fats from olives. Meat is almost non-existent for him, a sacred luxury consumed perhaps once or twice a year at a religious festival. His food is simple, but it is honest, and it is enough. Now, You step into the world of a wealthy Athenian citizen. The change is immediate and luxurious. You're in a well-appointed dining room, and the air is fragrant with exotic spices. The table is not laden with gruel, but with fine leavened wheat bread, artos, baked by a professional baker. His opson is a world away from the farmers. He has access to a variety of fresh fish, expertly prepared. His wine is a finer vintage, though still diluted, and his table is dotted with small plates of sweet honey cakes, nuts, and imported dried fruits. For him, a meal is as much a social statement as it is nourishment. He might host a private banquet where he and his guests can indulge in roasted fowl or even a small portion of pork. His diet is a reflection of his status, his education, and his ability to command the resources of a vast trading empire. Finally, you find yourself in a place of stark military austerity. You are in Sparta, and here food is not about pleasure or social status. It is about discipline and unity. The concept of a private dinner party is alien here. You enter a communal mess hall, or Phoenicia, where all Spartan men, from the highest-ranking officer to the lowliest private, eat together. A mainstream historical fact is that this communal dining was a cornerstone of Spartan society, designed to foster a sense of equality and brotherhood among the soldiers. Here, you get a taste of the most famous and most unappealing dish in all of ancient Greece. You are given a bowl of melasomos, or black broth. It's a dark, thick stew made from boiled pig's legs, blood, salt, and vinegar. The taste, by all accounts, was awful. A quirky tidbit is the famous story of a man from Syracuse who was given a taste of the black broth. He said he finally understood why the Spartans were so brave in battle. Anyone who had to eat that every day had nothing left to fear from death. The broth was a deliberate act of culinary austerity, designed to keep the Spartans focused on their military duties and to prevent them from becoming soft or decadent. The contrast between these three meals couldn't be sharper. The farmer eats to survive, the Athenian eats for pleasure and status, and the Spartan eats to become a weapon. The food is a mirror of their values and their world. And as you consider these stark differences, a debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether these rigid dietary differences were as absolute as the ancient sources suggest. Was the Athenian diet really so indulgent, or was that just a myth created by philosophers to criticize wealth? And was the Spartan diet truly so relentlessly grim? Or was a little of that melasomos propaganda designed to project an image of military toughness? Was there more fluidity and variation than we know? It's a question that reminds us that history is not always as black and white as it seems. You feel the weight of these different lives, the taste of their food a direct link to their realities, the simple sustenance of the farmer, the elegant banquet of the Athenian, and the brutal practicality of the Spartan's bowl. Each tells a different story of a civilization defined by its place at the table. You've seen the bread, you've tasted the wine, and you've understood the social rules of the table. But the true soul of any culture lies not just in its staples, but in its strange, quirky, and sometimes bizarre beliefs about food. We're going to step into the world of superstition, myth, and surprising delicacies, where what you ate was dictated not just by hunger, but by philosophy, fear, and a sense of wonder. You find yourself in the serene, sunlit grove of a man who was as famous for his mind as he was for his strange habits, Pythagoras. He was a philosopher, a mathematician, and a vegetarian. But he and his followers had one of the strangest food taboos in all of history. They absolutely under no circumstances, would eat or even touch fava beans. The reasons for this are mysterious, and it's a quintessential quirky tidbit. Some believed that the beans were sacred, holding the souls of the dead. Others believed they resembled the human fetus. A more practical theory is that they caused a life-threatening disease called favism in people with a certain genetic deficiency, and Pythagoras, through observation, simply knew they were dangerous. Whatever the reason, this was a strict taboo, and the story goes that Pythagoras himself would rather have been killed than cross a field of fava beans to escape his attackers. It's a bizarre, almost unbelievable fact that shows you just how deeply personal and spiritual their relationship with food could be. But the Greeks were not just avoiding things. They were eating things that we would never think to put on our plates. You hear a buzzing sound, and you see a young boy with a stick, carefully catching cicadas. It was a widely documented practice that the ancient Greeks, especially women, considered cicadas a delicacy. They would roast or fry them, and they were often described as a sweet, crunchy treat. The idea of eating an insect, a common source of protein in many parts of the world, was completely normal to them. And you've already heard about the snails and mussels they gathered and ate with relish. It reminds you that our definition of food is very much a product of our own time and place. Beyond the surprising delicacies, food was often intertwined with magic and superstition. You see a woman crushing garlic and onions, not just for a stew, but to ward off bad luck. A mainstream historical fact is that they believed these pungent foods had powerful properties that could ward off diseases and evil spirits. They would hang garlic braids above their doors to keep away bad luck, and they believed that eating them gave a person a strong, almost magical resilience. Bread, too, was not just for eating. Sometimes a piece of bread would be left on a plate for the dead, a symbolic gesture to a departed soul. It was a common ritual, a quiet way of showing respect and keeping the memory of a loved one alive. You stand in a quiet corner of a bustling marketplace, and you see an old woman selling small clay vessels filled with a liquid she calls melikriton. You might remember the name from the honey section. This mixture of honey, milk, and water wasn't just a drink. It was a powerful medicinal tonic, believed to cure a variety of ailments. And the act of sharing it was a way of showing compassion and care for a loved one. It's these small daily acts, these little rituals and superstitions that show you the deeper meaning food held in their culture. And as you consider these bizarre and fascinating traditions, a scholarly debate arises. Historians still argue whether these food taboos and beliefs were rooted in purely superstitious or religious origins, or if they had practical, proto-scientific explanations. For example, was the taboo against fava beans simply a spiritual belief? Or did it arise from a deep, observant understanding of the dangers of favism, passed down as a tradition rather than a medical fact? Was the belief in the power of garlic to ward off evil spirits simply superstition? Or did they have a rudimentary understanding of its antimicrobial properties? It's a question that reminds us of the fine line between magic and science in the ancient world, and how often a practical truth was dressed in the language of myth. You feel the weight of these ancient beliefs, the quiet mystery of a culture that saw food as so much more than just calories. It was a link to the divine, a source of magic, a symbol of life and death, and an expression of who they were. The cicada's hum and the rustle of the fava bean plants feel less like simple sounds and more like a quiet language you are just beginning to understand. The journey is drawing to a close, and you feel the weight of centuries settle around you. we've explored the humble barley bread, tasted the pungent opson, sipped the diluted wine, and understood the social and philosophical weight of a simple meal. But as you prepare to leave this ancient world, a final fascinating thought takes hold. The seemingly simple, often austere diet of the ancient Greeks didn't just fade into history. It is, in fact, the very foundation of one of the healthiest and most celebrated eating patterns in the modern world. You find yourself standing in a sun-drenched cafe today, sipping an espresso, and you realize that the menu is a direct echo of a world that existed thousands of years ago. The core principles that sustained a civilization in a rocky landscape are now a blueprint for modern wellness. This is a great mainstream historical fact. The Mediterranean diet, a modern dietary concept lauded by doctors and nutritionists, is a direct heir to the ancient Greek way of eating. It emphasizes the consumption of plant-based foods, healthy fats, and lean protein, all of which were the very staples of the Greek diet. The matzah has become our whole grain bread. The olive oil is still the star of the show, and the reliance on lentils, chickpeas, and a wide variety of vegetables remains central. The ancient Greek meal was, by its very nature, a model of balanced, healthful eating, even if they didn't know the scientific reasons why. You can almost taste the lineage. The olive oil that they used for cooking, lighting, and bathing is now a cornerstone of heart-healthy diets. The legumes, those humble lentils and chickpeas that provided most of the protein for the masses, are now celebrated as superfoods. The fish that they caught and salted is now a recommended part of a balanced diet, rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And even the moderation of their wine, with its light, diluted consistency, has become the healthy habit of having a single glass of red wine with dinner. It is a stunning realization that the simple choices they made out of necessity have become our conscious choices for health. But it's not just the food itself, it's the philosophy behind it. You can almost hear the soft voice of Hippocrates, reminding you that food is medicine, a concept that is now at the forefront of holistic health. The symposium, where conversation and community were as important as the meal, has become a modern ideal. The slow, mindful dinner with friends, where you savor not just the food, but the connection with others. This ancient diet was a social, philosophical, and physical practice, a complete system for living well. And here's one last quirky tidbit for you. While we've talked about bread as a utensil, the ancient Greeks also had a huge variety of bread shapes and types, some for specific religious festivals. The leganum, for example, was a simple, flat bread that could be used for a number of things. And they even had something called artolaganos, which was a bread used in festivals that was made with milk and honey. It was a testament to the fact that even in their simplicity, they had a sense of ceremony and art. As you stand here at the end of our journey, a final scholarly debate presents itself. Historians still argue whether the so-called Mediterranean diet is a true, authentic historical recreation of the ancient Greek diet or a modern, romanticized construct. Did we simply cherry-pick the healthiest aspects, like olive oil and vegetables, while ignoring the high consumption of barley, the lack of refrigeration, and the occasional consumption of a cicada? Are we celebrating an idealized version of their diet, while overlooking the more difficult and less palatable realities of their lives? It's a question that reminds us that history is never quite as simple as a recipe. You feel the past and present merge, the ancient world and the modern one intertwined through something as simple and profound as food. The journey is over, but the quiet knowledge you've gained remains, a gentle echo of a time when food was a matter of life and a beautiful expression of culture. It's time to come home now. Now, as the last words settle, let your imagination fade. The scent of wild thyme, the taste of salty olives, the sound of ancient Greek voices, let it all soften and dissolve into the quiet of your room. You can let the image of the Athenian dining room go now, and the Spartan mess hall, and the farmer's humble kitchen. The knowledge is safe inside your mind, a quiet little history waiting for you. There's nothing more to see or to hear, just the gentle hum of the world around you, slowly, softly, bringing you to a place of rest. Your eyelids feel heavy now, and your breathing is slow and deep. The stories are done, and the world is still. Let yourself sink into the quiet, into the comfort of your own space. There's nothing more to do but to close your eyes, relax your muscles, and let the night take you. Everything is calm. Everything is peaceful. Everything is quiet. Just breathe and sleep.